Actually, probably shoot it to the that guy up there. There you go.
She got back here.
So you get a weak battery, probably.
So I went there on Thursday nights they did boxing events. Friday nights they did the wrestling. This is back in.
I wasn't even alive.
And then on
Shut up,
Sundays,
Jackie. Makes us feel old.
Sundays was the roller derby.
Yeah. Oh, the roller derby. Yes. They have derbies in Auburn. I think they still
This
do.
was a.
So Pastor Dan, put not your trust in the works of men.
Some people do, but it's not as common, and it's like.
You're doing it again. Oh, really? So nice.
All right, Delby. Can I just have you move this? Okay. I don't know why this is not working. But it is. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll try it. Maybe we'll pray, get started, and then maybe I can describe that. Yeah. All right. Let me know when I'm on. Oh, thank you. Okay, so we're on. So I'm going to ask you guys to do a couple things. First of all, last week, nobody wanted the mic, and I understand that. But that also means, what's that? Turn your mic on. Oh, my mic.
Speaking of mics.
Hey. I'm going to wait. You're going to have to turn me down. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Let's turn that down a little bit more. I think that's still a lot for this room. Okay. All right. Okay, so last week, I understand like nobody wants to use the mic because it's weird. I know, I get that. But it does, well, I told Bobby to do it. But no, I think he understands the need for it. But if people can't hear you out there, then they're just looking at my dumb face, nodding at you, So it really does help to have, that voice in there to say what that question is. So if you could, if you have something to say, grab that mic and give people something to listen to. And so anyway, the other thing is, I'll just put this out there. I ended up weed eating for most of the day, so I really almost have nothing without these visuals. So I put together visuals to help us take a look at something today. And if we don't have that, then we're just going to go through this just kind of off the cuff, which actually I did read it and kind of have something to talk about. So if nothing else, we'll see how this goes. I think what I'm going to do is ask you guys to be praying for my Wednesdays, because for some reason, everything is needed on Wednesday, and it's all urgent. I don't know what happens, but something happens. Thursday, silence. Friday, silence. Weekend, silence. Monday, silence. Tuesday, silence. Wednesday, everything is needed right now. And so I will get in here, and I'll start studying at 5 o'clock for a 7 o'clock message. And that's not enough time. So just pray for my Wednesdays that they would kind of tone down, and I'd like to be able to be prepared for you guys when you're here. So I'm going to pray for this little guy right here too, because it's not working, and I really want the visuals. So let's go ahead and let's pray for that too. Lord, as we enter into the study of your word, Lord, it is something to contemplate that the God of the universe cares enough about us to tell us how your grace works, Lord, and how you have reached out toward us and how you have pursued us, even though we should have been pursuing you. Lord, I just pray that you'd help us to see the beauty and the value of that. Lord, I pray that in these early chapters that you would help us to understand in here in Romans that there's a reason that we are justly under judgment if we don't come to grace. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would help us to see that. And Lord, as we look at this, we understand that it is always going to be your Spirit that reveals your word to us. And so we pray that your Spirit would do that to us. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to be, to give us the spiritual gift, I guess, Lord, of faith to hear what you have to say to us. And Lord, I pray that you will help us not to frustrate and subdue the Holy Spirit as you communicate with us. And we pray these things in Jesus' name, amen. Oh yeah, and I pray for my little my little remote control. I pray that it would work. And if it doesn't, I pray for Doug to do well back there. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Doug. Why don't we also turn down the air?
I was just gonna say, is everyone cool enough now, so I'll turn it off?
I'm actually on the cool side for sure. So
Okay.
okay, so here we go. We were reading through Romans 1. Now, I think I said this, yeah, I did say this before, but I really don't like studies through books, especially Romans, where it devolves into reading like a sentence or a word here and there, and it like, that people get so into the weeds that you lose the momentum of the argument that's being presented. So I really do want to keep on the momentum of the message that's in Romans. There's an argument, an idea being laid out, and if we get too into the weeds, then we lose our momentum and we don't understand what God is telling us. So, yes, that is true. Yes, I have been weed whacking all day. I've been face to face with the thistles of our failure. So, but I want to take a look at Romans chapter 1 again. And I'll probably start, let's start in verse 18. So he says, the wrath of God, by the way, this is in contrast to the righteousness of God that has been revealed to us through his grace, okay? Then he says, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, so that the things that have, in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. For although they knew God, and this is where I want to be right here, verse 21. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Okay, so he's talking about just the condition of man, right? He's not talking about particular guys. He's talking about how basically here's the situation we're in, okay? And I think it's very interesting that he starts with the idea that we have been placed in a universe and in a world where God's works are evident to us. And, there's kind of an argument out there that, God is invisible, and there's sort of like, where are you going to find God? Where can you find God? What rock do you have to overturn to find God? What planet do you have to look behind to find God? And really the answer is, if you're looking at the rocks and the planets, you should be able to know God is there. I've spent my life painting. Tom has too, but a different kind of painting. But I used to love portraits, and I found out that really it was the fact that I just love people, and I love faces. I love how God has created people, and so I would draw, and I drew all my young life. I drew all my life, and I thought I would become a portrait painter at some point when there was more money in the arts, and God diverted from that. But when you look at my painting, if you look at any artist's painting, you can look at that painting and know that there was an artist behind it. You don't have to look behind the lines, and under the paint. You don't have to scrape up the paint to see if there's an artist there. You know that there's an artist because somebody painted the painting, And that's really what we're looking at in our world here. That there's so much beauty, so much complexity, so much here that you shouldn't have to look behind the tree to see if there's a God. You should be able to look at the tree and just know there is a God. It's a really simple argument. But I want to take a look at three of my favorite arguments for the existence of God. And these, to me, these make it really hard for me, I think for anybody, to really deny the existence of God, okay? So the first one, let me see if this will work. And if it doesn't, then I'm sorry, Doug, you're going to be controlling it. It is not working. Okay, all right. I'm like pointing it everywhere. Did it work? Ha! So was it when I was pointing it like this? It might have been. Okay, so this is the argument I'm just going to refer to as parent species, okay? So when you think about, a species, a creature in our animal world, it could even include us. When you think about any living creature, basically, the evolutionary perspective is that they have sort of, over time, increased in their complexity. And, you can kind of follow it back to the simple cell. And over time, it's increased in its complexity, and the idea is that we have gained over time through, mutation after mutation after mutation, we've gained a bunch of complexity. But if you ask anybody who really understands breeding animals, really what it comes down to is actually that basically every animal, let's say dog, okay? There are tall genes in dogs and short genes in dogs. And there are, brindle genes in dogs, and there are spotted genes in dogs. And there are, what are some other, short-tailed genes and long-tailed genes. And over time, they're all there, and you can sort of specify a dog, essentially through breeding, and what it does is it sort of turns off the genes, the genetics that are there. It's sort of, let's say if you want a tall dog gene, you end up sort of turning off the short dog gene, okay? Let me see if this will work. Nope. Let's go to the second picture there, Doug.
There.
Did it go? Okay. So you got the different genetics, and basically what you're doing is you're sort of turning off certain genetics in order to get certain genetics that you want to show up. And over time, you can turn off enough of the short dog genes in order to get the tall dog to really show up. It takes a lot to get back to the point where you've turned on those short dog genes if you want to redirect toward a shorter dog, a smaller dog. Okay, so basically the idea is that dog, let's say you've got a parent species of a dog, that dog is going to have all the genetics for all of the short dogs. If you go backward in time, right, the first dog has all the genetics for all the dogs that would follow it. So let's see. We can go to the next picture. I just want you to get a visual for that. So that parent dog is going to have all the genetics for the different types of dogs, okay? So let's go one more slide here. Okay, so what kind of creature is going to have, this is just for you, Beth. So the question is, what kind of creature is going to have all the genetics for, let's say, all four-footed animals? What kind of creature is the parent species for that? The evolutionary view is that would be a simpler creature, but if you understand genetics, that's not a simpler creature. That creature has all the genetics for all the creatures that would follow it. Okay, so if you reverse back past the original dog, supposedly you're going to get back to a parent species, but that parent species has to be more complex than any of the simplified species that you get later on. Okay, because they're simplifying as they go out. The non-parent dog, the child dog, has less active genetics, not more, okay? So I should say fewer active genetics. So let's go back another step here, okay? What is the simple cell then? Okay, simple cell, if you go all the way back and you reverse and you go back to what the original cell is, that cell should have the DNA coding for every creature that would follow it. I've included fish here, I've included birds. Every living creature that comes from that simple cell should have all the genetics for all that. So is that simple? That is not simple, right? There's no way that that's simple. And so I think that's a really hard argument to get past if you understand genetics. And I don't understand them that well, but other people who know genetics have said that this is a real problem. Because if you go back to the beginning, they're not so simple. the next one, let's take a look at the irreducible complexity. Okay, so this is one of my favorite arguments. There's a guy named Michael Behe who has done a much better job than me at doing this. I actually wanted to show you guys a video today, but I couldn't figure out how to get the video to work on our online and here. So we're doing it this way. Michael Behe is a person who got into a topic called, or actually coined the phrase, irreducible complexity. Okay, now this is going to sound a little bit like the last one, but it's actually a bit different. Totally different idea. Okay, so your eye, let's take a look at this here. Your eye has a cornea, a pupil, an iris, a lens, a retina, and a nerve, right? Those are the basic components of your eye. Now, I think it's a lot more complex than that once you take a look, because you're going to have veins in there, you're going to have skin types in there, you're going to have different things like that. You're going to have protective layers and liquid layers and so on and so forth. But this is a pretty well simplified version of what the eye is. The eye will not work without every detail here. It is not going to work without a lens, right? Because what's it going to see without the lens? It needs that glass opening. Well, speaking of the glass opening, you got that pupil, and that pupil isn't just an opening. It has aperture like a camera, right? It's going to open up if it's dark. It's going to close up if it's light. And so that eye isn't going to work at night. Now, in a time where there was, I shouldn't say in a time because it's even today, but in our world, we're sort of sheltered from the sort of prey-predator relationship, right? We go home, we lock the door. Generally, bears stay out of our houses, hopefully, for most of us. But there was a time in the human experience where we got to see that much more up close. And if you go hunting, you'll see that much more up close. You'll see that prey-predator relationship. Well, if the creatures don't have the ability to dilate their eyes, then they're goners, right? At night, they're just goners. They're going to be eaten because they can't navigate. So you need that pupil to open up and close up. Let's see, the cornea, the iris. Let's see. One of the big things is that as the light comes into that lens, it turns it upside down. Your brain has to understand how to sort of invert the image and in a sense, perceive that as right side up. So that's pretty interesting. Well, let's go to the next slide here. That's actually kind of important. Sorry about the grotesqueness of this image. But that's actually kind of important, okay? The brain is actually the thing that does the seeing, okay? Your eye doesn't do the seeing. Your eye is basically a nerve system to get the image back to your brain. So seeing doesn't even happen in the eye. So you can't reduce the brain out of the eye's system of seeing, right? So the idea here is that everything is necessary. And if you're sort of presenting an evolutionary idea of it sort of gradually evolved over time, at some point, okay, let's go with it. At some point, though, some creature out there developed an eye in all of its complexity, and none of it could be missing. You couldn't have a non-liquid filled eye. You couldn't have an eye without an iris. You couldn't have an eye without a lens. You had to have the cornea in there. You have to have all of it. Not only that, like I said before, you have to have a brain to do the seeing. So the eye is irreducibly complex in terms of the brain as well. But then you also have to have blood going to your eye, right? So now you can't have that eye without a heart. How does the eye operate without a heart? So the eye is irreducibly complex in terms of, you understand the term, right? Irreducibly complex. It means that it's complex and you can't take anything away. Irreducible, okay? It's complex and you can't take anything away for it to work. It has to have every element there. And that includes the brain and the heart. And then, of course, how does the heart work without the lungs? Right? You have to have a skull for the keeping it in place. You have to have lungs to feed the heart so that you can get oxygen and other vitamins up in there. None of the body works unless all of the body's there. The whole body can't do without the eye. Or where would the seeing be? You can't do without the ear. Where would the hearing be, right? The Bible talks about that. So that's the concept of irreducible complexity. in the evolutionary framework, the idea is that at some point, something started to develop the eye, but it didn't, develop immediately. Well, how in the world did that evolutionary little brain in there figure out that it needed an eye, but didn't know how to develop it completely? Well, I would love to have wings. My brain isn't telling my body to do that, right? I don't have the genetics for that. And if I did, then my whole system would have to change because I would have to be able to work with what the wings require. Michael Behe, is it Behe? Yes. Michael Behe, the guy that coined the phrase, it talks about simple cells, right? The cells in your body. At one point, science could look at these things and go, oh, that looks simple from the microscope that we're looking through, that looks simple. And they could go, oh, well, that seems like it could have developed evolutionarily, But as people looked at closer and closer at it, they realized that each of these cells has what they call a flagellum, and it's a little tail that comes off of it. And that tail spins, I believe, at thousands of rotations per second. Maybe it's minute, I can't remember, but it's very fast, okay? In order to do that, that little spinner, that little tail on the backside of it, has to be shaped a certain way. It's kind of like it rotates like that, like a corkscrew. Has to be shaped that way so that it can actually get the movement forward that it needs. It can't just be straight, okay? And then it has to sort of gear into this little set of gears, and it has to have a little spindle, and it has to have all these different mechanics to make it work. And if you look closely at this thing, it looks like a machine. But it is so small that a microscope can hardly pick it up. They have to recreate it through digital, imagery to get you to be able to see what's there. These things are incredible in terms of their complexity. And if it doesn't work, your cell doesn't work. And if your cell doesn't work, you don't work. Your cells are necessary for your system. So how in the world did that system develop? Yeah, Jackie.
So when you're a baby, you don't have that much vision, right? You can only see certain colors, or you can't see color until you're a certain age or something.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the brain then, I guess?
Yeah, right. So I would say...
My sister was telling me about this because she just had a baby. And
yeah.
So.
Apparently kids like Mickey Mouse because he's black and white. They like the hard contrast of the figure because they don't need color that much at that age.
Can they see pattern or?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell. But yeah, Bobby, do you have something on that?
If you take a kitten, when it's born, and you cover its eyes, and you keep its eyes covered for the next 6 months, and then you pull the tape off of the kitten's eyes, or the now cat's eyes, it will never be able to see.
It has to have that
It
early.
has to have the light early to be able to develop the brain to interpret the vision. The second,
Right? Who would do that?
the second thing that's real important is that the control and movement of the eyes,
Yeah.
and the
right.
control and movement of the iris in the eyes, so that when your eyes move, they move together in
Right.
sequence. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense what you see.
Oh, okay, so let me give you another example of how complex this thing works, okay? I used to get really tired. I still get really tired when I read. And somebody said you should go to an eye doctor for that. I was like, no, I don't need to go to an eye doctor. My vision is actually extremely good. I can see leaves on the distant trees. I mean, I have extremely good vision. So I was like, oh, I don't need to go to an eye doctor. And I don't remember the number that I have, but it's some high number. It's better than 20/20 that my eyes are working at. And so, I'm like, I don't need an eye doctor. And I finally, one day I was talking to an eye doctor, just happened to meet somebody. He says that he's an eye doctor. And I said, well, could you tell me something about, somebody told me that I should go to you because I get tired when I read. He's like, oh yeah, that's an eye problem. He said, what it is when you are reading, your eyes are ever so slightly misaligned. It has nothing to do with how well you can see in each eye. Your eyes are ever so slightly misaligned, like a hair off. And because of that, your brain is working constantly to make sure that the images stay together. And he said, so that taxes your brain, and that's why you fall asleep. And it made it extremely evident that our eyes are on this minute, perfect system of alignment. And mine is slightly off, so I get tired. And if yours was slightly off too, you'd get tired. But since most of you probably have yours perfectly on, what we see doesn't look any different. But my brain has to do a little bit more adjustment than yours. And so I get tired. And it's so precise. Yeah.
I have to lift up my glasses to be able to see the line straight, otherwise it doesn't crisscross.
Interesting. Yeah.
They gave me prisms to
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tom, you got some?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about what you said is very important about the idea of light. Because if you go back to Genesis 1, it says the earth was, well, maybe not the earth, let's just say it was formless and void and darkness covered.
Yeah.
So this is just one aspect. The eye needs light. So if there was no light, if it was just darkness before creation, how would anything have done anything?
Yeah. Has anybody seen the movie The Privileged Planet? It's a fantastic movie. Look for The Privileged Planet, okay? Similar idea. Basically, that God has not only set up an amazing universe, but he's made it observable. And he's given us things like light. And he's placed us in a position where the exact size of the moon is, I think it's 400 or something like that. It's more than that. It's some amount less large than the sun, and it's that distance closer so that the moon is exactly the same size as the sun visually from the surface of the earth. And because of that, now we can observe the corona of the sun. We can observe it exactly. So we're in this perfect position to be able to observe. And God has done this in many other ways. I can't remember all the details of the movie, but he's done this in many other ways to let us be able to observe and to worship him, right? That's the whole thing, is he's done this precisely so that we could know that he's out there, you know, and begin relationship with us. He's leaving us clues, you know. We didn't evolve. Yeah.
The reduction to the ridiculous is the mousetrap.
Yeah, yeah. Ron mentioned the mousetrap. The mousetrap is something that's very simple, and yet most of us can look at it and say somebody designed that because it has a function, and there's a spring load to it, and it has to be triggered, and so on and so forth. If you don't have any of the elements of that mousetrap, it doesn't work. And then you can also see that there's a purpose to the mousetrap. You know, it's simple, but nobody would mistake it for having just happened by chance. Your eye, yes, it looks more organic than a mousetrap, but it is way more complex. And so is your cell, you know. Yeah. So in terms of seeing, your eye, going back to what Tom was saying, your eye is irreducibly complex in terms of the muscle contractions that have to happen and the dilation of the iris and all that stuff. But seeing is bigger than the eye. Seeing involves light. And if light isn't there, then the seeing is kaput, doesn't exist. So your seeing is irreducibly complex, and it includes light. It includes your heart. It includes musculature. It includes, your whole system.
different eyes for the different species give them more or less of an advantage. We're human and we operate using the regular just daylight.
Yeah.
There's the infrared and other lights that we can't see,
Yeah.
and sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds that are super low, super high, that other creatures can hear and do
Yeah.
something we cannot.
Yeah.
So we don't, for our life, tend to not need it,
Mm-hmm.
but other creatures need it.
Yeah. I saw a rattlesnake today. I was weed eating, and there was a rattlesnake there. And somebody said that they were talking about how they had an encounter with a rattlesnake, but it hadn't shed, it had just recently shed, and their eyes don't adjust for a time. Like they actually shed like, I don't know, I guess the surface of their eye or something, but it hadn't adjusted yet. What's that? Okay, so that's what it was, yeah. So they're blind while they're shedding. Yeah, interesting. So, but the reason that they can still survive is because their tongues still sense their surroundings. Crazy, isn't it? I mean,
Just learned there's creatures under the sea.
mm-hmm,
I want to say it might be a type of octopus, I could be wrong, but they're really, really deep,
mm-hmm.
and they have no eyes.
Yeah,
They don't need it.
they don't need it at all.
They've got other things, another sense. I think it's touch that's
Yeah.
really good. And there are some things, some species that are deaf.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, take the bat, okay? It sends out sonar. We've only recently discovered the use of sonar in the modern world, and this thing was born with it, you know? How did the bat survive without sonar, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Crazy.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I would encourage you guys to use microphones because, again, it really gets frustrating to people watching not to be able to hear what you guys are saying. And you guys are saying important things. Like I'm not the only important person here. So so make sure that you get that in there. It's when it comes down to it, the idea that we evolved slowly and didn't need certain things doesn't actually really work. And I understand there's a lot of arguments for evolution, but these are some of the things that I look at it and go, I don't know how you get past these arguments. The other one that, go ahead.
They argue it because it fits their narrative.
Yeah,
They don't want a creator.
they don't want a creator, right. Well, let's go back to this verse, right? Although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. They became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. I think that's the state of it, you know. Now, there are really intelligent evolutionists. I'm not going to say that they're stupid. I've been in sort of like the Christian world and especially the homeschool world enough to have heard people say, oh, well, all the evolutionists are stupid. No, they're not. They're very, very intelligent people out there. But there's a couple of things that they don't address. Did you have something?
No, I don't want to say it online.
Oh, okay. And then I want to bring up, again, the guy named William Lane Craig, just as my third argument here. So William Lane Craig, that's his face if you want to take a look for him at some point. He presents what is called the Kalam cosmological argument. It's a very simple argument. Basically, he argues for this idea that if anything came into existence, if it began to exist, then something had to have caused it. That's pretty much the whole argument, right? So if the universe came into existence, then something had to have caused it to come into existence. It can't have been here without an origin. Yeah.
Some people aren't going to like what I have to say, but there was a Big Bang, and there was a hot Big Bang. And, you know, a lot of people say, and when God said, let there be light, everything that would have been created already probably would have died from the energy of the expansion when God created the universe. I mean, it's not a simple matter.
Yeah.
You were talking about the eye, or one may talk about the complexity of the brain and how we talk and how we listen and how we hear. And all of that is exceedingly important. But when God said, let there be light,
Yeah.
there had to have been a huge explosion. And it would have destroyed everything. God created light first.
Why
Yeah.
does there need to be an explosion? He's God.
Yeah. Well, I guess he could have just placed things where they go. That's possible. Yeah. Well, I want to go back to the idea, though. There is what they call, I think it's redshift everywhere we look. So that means that there is expansion happening based on like, it's almost like the Doppler effect. You know how if a police car is driving by, you can hear it go, like it kind of does this high and then low. Or cars, they go, that's when it's coming towards you. Yeah, thank you. when it's coming toward you, the sound vibrations that are coming towards you are compacted because it's arriving. When it passes, those same sound waves are going to extend. Your experience of those sound waves are going to extend. So you get the high, then the low. And that same thing happens with light, because light also has a frequency. And so you have red shift if it's moving away. I think it's like green or blue shift if it's moving towards you, blue. So everything has red shift, which means that there's an expansion to the universe. So that kind of supports that idea that everything's coming from a source. But that's the argument, right? If everything is coming from a source, if it's coming from a center point, then there had to have been a beginning. If it were in stasis, then you don't have to have a beginning. But I'm actually going back to the argument of if there is no God and everything's coming from a center point, then it had to have exploded from this center point. And this is the one that just, it makes no sense, okay? This makes no sense. Why do we have planets and solar systems? Okay, if everything blows up, presumably they say from like the size of a pea or something like that. Okay, so let's just start there. Do you guys know what a black hole is? Okay, let me just ask this. Is it or is it not an actual hole? It is not a hole, right? It is matter so condensed that it creates a gravitational pull that nothing can escape, even including light. If it's close enough, nothing will escape it, right? So it's not a hole, it's a dense ball of matter that nothing can escape because it has a gravitational pull. Now, if all of the universe were compacted down to the size of a pea, how great do you think that gravitational pull would be? It would be pretty strong. Why did everything move out from that center point? Not even light could escape it. Why would everything move out from a center point? There's nothing in the evolutionary argument that answers that question to me. Now, I know that there's probably something like a quantum mechanics explanation somehow. I don't understand that. Maybe there are some really smart people that understand it, but I don't understand how that could solve the problem of just the basic physics of nothing can move out of that, okay?
Quantum physics is a theory.
It's a theory.
Quantum physics works, but everything they discuss is merely a theory.
Yeah. One of the things is that they talk about the random movement of items in quantum physics. There's rules to it, but there's still sort of random in appearance. But you can't explain, you can explain like sub-microscopic movements with the quantum thing, but you can't explain the existence of the cosmos and the defiance of gravity to come out from a center point. You can't explain that with quantum physics as far as I know. So it's just one of those arguments. How do they get there, you know?
It's like you and I have discussed in the past. A pea size of matter, you don't know where it came from, hangs in a universe that you don't know how, and you don't know where the universe comes from. It explodes and creates more matter than we have a number for.
Right.
That goes into an infinite universe.
Yeah.
That they have no clue about any of that.
And yet all
So-
this matter that's massive only
That
is
that alone, if you believe in the Big Bang Theory,
Yeah.
you have more faith than anybody
Yeah.
on the planet.
Let me just repeat that for people online. If you can take this idea that a pea-sized thing has exploded outward and has become more matter than we can comprehend, and more space than we can comprehend, if that has happened and we don't know what initiated the explosion, what put the pea there in the first place, right? Why does that exist? What kind of force caused it to expand outward? If you can just accept that on faith, then you have more faith than a Christian, because we believe in an outside cause that would cause those things. Bobby, go ahead.
There's a song about that.
There's a song about that?
How big is God? How deep and wide his vast domain?
Mm.
He's big enough to rule the mighty universe, yet small enough to live within the heart. That's all I'm going to say.
It's good.
And that is some things we have to take by faith
Yeah.
and trust. And faith means trust. Trust
Yeah.
in God. Trust
Yeah.
that what God, the Word,
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what it is.
Ooh, let me park on that for unless I don't want to interrupt if you're not finished.
No, that's
Actually,
fin-
okay. So I want to park on that for a second. Some people define the faith that we have in God as like sort of like non-evidential, like we don't need the evidence, we just believe, and it's blind faith, right? Yet, let's just go back to Jesus alone. Jesus did miracles, and if he said, if you don't believe my words, at least believe the works, right? So in other words, Jesus was presenting evidence and wanted people to look at the evidence. When we look at the universe, what we're doing and what Paul is doing is he's saying there is evidence. This is not just somebody wrote down somewhere that you need to have blind faith and we're just going to trust that guy knew something about a God, right? That's not what he's doing. He's saying there is evidence in the world. The world itself is the evidence. And so if you can't look at the evidence, then you're sort of blind, right? It basically, and I want to read this verse again. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God. What he's saying is mankind knows that there's a God. And I don't care if they're saying, I'm not an atheist, or I'm sorry, I'm not an anti-theist, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God at all, right? That people say that. But I think that deep down inside, in the heart of every person, there is a question. And I'll say this, 99.9999% of those people, if they lose their keys, they're going to be like, Lord, help me find my keys. If something happens to them, they're going to be sending up a little prayer just in case, right? Because something inside of them knows. They know there's something out there. Or if they get angry about something, they're going to have it out with God, if they're angry enough, because something inside is saying there is a God out there. I wanted to go back to the William Lane Craig cosmological argument. William Lane Craig is a philosopher, I guess you could say, and he's a debater. He's really good. He's somebody I would encourage you guys all to look at and listen to his argument. I think I mentioned this last week, but I'll just say this again. I've seen him in debates with the top. Yes, yeah. He had 3 names. Remember? Yep, William Lane Craig. He's gone up against people like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, high-level, top-level atheists. And he presents his argument. It's very simple. Everything that comes into existence must have a cause. And if the universe has come into existence, and we believe that it does based on redshift, right? We believe that there's a sort of a starting point for the universe. And if the universe came into existence, it must have an outside cause. And I've seen him present that simple argument, and I've watched great atheists argue for, they'll respond with, well, God must be evil. But that's not the argument. That's not the question. We're not even arguing whether God is good or evil, right? We're not at this point, we're not making that argument. We're just saying something had to cause the universe. And they'll go this way and that way and behind it and under it and over it, but they can't fight the argument. The world exists because something caused it. Some people believe in what they call theistic evolution, where there's a belief that there's still evolution, but God sort of initiated the process. I know, right? I disagree with it. But again, what's that?
There is evolution. It's called macroevolution.
That's a good point.
A bird flies into the forest. If it doesn't get killed in the first hour and it procreates, the yellow
Right.
will go away
Right.
for survival. But what you're
Yeah.
talking about, microevolution, doesn't exist. never existed.
Yeah, so Mike, no, he said macro. He meant macro evolution doesn't exist. So, in other words, crossing species. We don't have any evidence of a creature becoming a different creature. All we have is a model, the evolutionary model that says it must have happened. We don't have evidence of that model taking place, though.
Yeah, birds didn't
So
come
far,
from
no,
dinosaurs.
nothing. Yeah,
That's what
right.
they want us to think.
Yeah.
They don't have fossils to prove anything.
Yeah, they have finished, completely evolved species, and no transitionary species. Although they would say we're all transitionary species, all of us are transitioning, and I. That's right. Oh boy, probably. So these are the arguments that tell me there is a God, right? You can look at the universe and you can say something caused it. You can look at the universe and say there are reasons not to believe that there was an evolutionary process that got us here. You can look at things and say there's enough complexity that if that thing were if even one element were removed, it couldn't exist. It couldn't work. Based on that, there can't be an evolving system up to the level of complexity that thing is. You can't have a partial eye. You can't have a partial hearing system. You have to have a whole system, including the brain, to understand what the eye is bringing into it. You know, I mean, one of you guys mentioned, I think it was Bobby mentioned, even just the musculature that's in there to make sure that you can dilate that pupil it's something magnificent. And by the way, eyes are also beautiful. You know, I showed you like these grotesque cross sections up here, but I mean, there's very few things as beautiful as an eye. I look down at Blake, you know, my little Blakies. Blake has beautiful eyes. He just has beautiful eyes, the deep blue, and I just look at that kid every so often, and there are times where like he's even misbehaving. And I'll be looking at him just like, I mean, not out loud because I don't want to affirm his misbehavior, but I'm like, that kid has beautiful eyes, you know? And so do all my kids. But there's just something amazing about how God has set this all up, you know? And by the way, even that beauty, not just the eyes, but the beauty of the human being is a part of procreation, the process of attraction. And without that, we don't have a shot past a generation. So even that is part of our process, part of our survival as beings, as a species. So these are things that tell me, you know, and should tell all of us that there is a God. And so, but that's the starting point. Okay, I want to go back to this idea that we talked about last week. That's the starting point. The existence of a God is the starting point. Because what that does is it tells us that there is a higher being, and that being must be at least pretty good to have created this world, right? I'm speaking facetiously. Yes, thank you. Everything good in this world has its source in the good creator. And that's all there is to it, to me. There are evils in this world too, but those evils exist because people separated from the good creator and defied him, you know. And that's, of course, the story of Genesis. But the whole idea here is that there is a God, and if there is a God, we can presume that there is also expectations put on us, right? We talked about the mousetrap a second ago. When somebody invented the mousetrap, and it's got this little spring load, and it can trap the mouse or whatever it does, you know, there was a purpose for that thing when they invented it. Almost everything that has been invented has its source in a purpose. It started with a purpose. Now, if we were created and we were invented, then we have to go, well, what was our purpose? Why are we here? Why did God create us? And the Bible says that we were created to be in relationship with him. We were actually created with hearts that could love him. And that ends up being the highest commandment, right? So if we were created with hearts that could love, and we're avoiding our purpose, in terms of our relationship with God, then we're not functioning as we're meant to be functioning. I don't know, have you guys ever put out a mousetrap and had it not work? I have. Yes, I have put out mousetraps. I'm sorry, Beth. Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. Well, this was before that, actually, to be really honest. But yeah, I've put out mousetraps and had them not work. And it's frustrating because I had a purpose for that, and it didn't work, right? I mean, the mouse was actually smarter. Yeah, it was more intelligent than me.
I had a cat that was smarter than the mouse
Really?
and the mousetrap.
Wow.
There were no mice.
See, that's what you need right there. Another intelligent thing.
Good.
Yeah.
She'd lay him at my feet and say, I got to teach you how to hunt.
Yeah. It's funny because when I saw that rattler, I was weed eating today. When I saw the rattler, the family that was there, they were just like, "Oh, leave the rattlesnake because we like that it takes the mice away. It gets rid of the mice." I was like, "I would rather have the mice than the rattlesnake," just saying. But those things give me the willies. Yeah, it was close to me too. I was nervous. I was tempted actually, but I just felt cold-blooded about it, But anyway, I know it's weird. No, I know it's a serpent, but I get weirded out. But when you create something with a purpose, you want that thing to work in its purpose. And God has created us with a purpose, and we haven't been functioning as purposed. And so that's a lot about what this is. There is a requirement over us. There are standards. There's a call to us as human beings. You weren't just plopped in this space by accident. You were designed. You were created with purpose. And if you were created with purpose, we should be looking for what that purpose is. And the whole thing here is that the first step in our downfall is that we could recognize that there was a God that holds us culpable, that we're accountable to that knowledge, right? We could see that there was a God, but we didn't treat him as God, and I love that it says, nor were they thankful. We weren't thankful, right? Thankful for what, right? How many of you guys have ever experienced a chapter in your life where you couldn't feel thankful? You ever been there? I've been there, yeah. I'm not thankful for every ache and pain that I have. I don't enjoy that. But the fact is, when I look at the world around me, I should be able to look at the world and I should be able to say, this place is beautiful. It's amazingly functional. Everything is designed with some kind of purpose and how it supports life and so on and so forth. And when I look at it, I should be able to be thankful to God for the world he's put me into and for putting me into it, Now, I'm just going to give you one more example. I was listening to a podcast by a guy who is an evolutionary biologist, okay? So his focus is to show how amazing evolution is. What's funny is he's looking at the design in the world and going, look at how amazing evolution is. And I just listened to him like, this is amazing that you're missing it, But I do like his podcast because he gets into some really complex things, and it's very interesting to listen to. I just have to understand that there's a God behind the complexity he's talking about. But he was interviewing a guy talking about, trying to remember the term for it, biofilms, okay? Biofilms. He said as an example of a biofilm, if you go to the river and you step on a rock and it's slick, what's in there is a biofilm, right? You've just stepped on a biofilm, and that's why your foot slips. That biofilm is, if you were to take it, you would never stick that in your mouth, right? Number one, it's gross, and God has designed you not to like gross things, okay? As part of your design, okay? So you would never put that in your mouth because if you know anything about the science of it, that's full of bacteria. So when you're at the river, you go, well, I don't know if I even want to swim in this river because there's this biofilm down there that's full of bacteria. Well, if you understand how this whole thing works, really what's happening is that biofilm is trapping all the bacteria and purifying the water. Okay? So it's part of the complex design to make sure that that water is safe for you to get into, okay? Now that's kind of cool, but then you come to the human system and you realize there are biofilms all over the place, okay? Your teeth have plaque. That's a biofilm. It's meant to protect you. I know. Why do we scrub it off? I don't know. Actually, that's a really important question. So I'm gonna get real gross with you, okay? Oh, by the way, Doug, I'm sorry. I think we're good for now with the slides. So if you want to join us up here, you can. One of our biofilms, though, is, I'm trying to think of the medical term for it, your mucus. I'm trying not to say the word snot, okay? So it's your mucus, okay? Now, here's how a biologist thinks of your body, okay? We think of it as, this is the outside, and then there's an inside. If you were to stick your food in your mouth, then it's going inside, right? But that's not how a biologist thinks of your system. They think of your whole digestive system as outside of your body because it's open to things coming into it, okay? So it's like you have skin out here, and then it goes into your mouth, and you have skin in there, and then it goes down, and that's still a type of skin. It's part of your epidermis, basically. And it goes down, and you can digest in here, and where you digest in your stomach is considered the outside of your body still, because it has not entered into the things that receive those nutrients and put it into your body. Like your organs? Yes, your organs.
It's called the alimentary canal.
The alimentary canal, did I get that right? Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so that's all considered literally by biologists, that's considered the outside of your body. Now, here's why that's important. You have biofilms, okay? And you have mucus, okay? Germs floating around in the air, and it goes up your nose because you breathe in, and it attaches to your mucus. Now, what is that doing? That's doing exactly what that layer at the bottom of the river is doing. It's trapping that little organism that shows up. Now, you guys know what vaccination is, right? It's where they take a little organism and they stick it in your blood, and your system is supposed to recognize that and then alert the rest of your body not to accept that little organism, right? That little germ or whatever. Well, that's exactly what your biofilm is doing, okay? That little organism is floating around in the air, and you breathe in, and it goes up into your little biofilm that's in there, and what that does is, what do? Right? Trying to get that not to be so loud online. What that does is it distributes that biofilm with that little organism right down into your stomach, which is still considered outside your body. And your system goes through all of its stuff, and it figures out, okay, these are the things we want. Oh, look at that. There's an invader here. And in your stomach, which is still considered outside your body where it's safe, it figures that thing out, and it identifies that's a problem, and it sends an alert to your lungs and your whatever else in your system to say, don't accept that thing. So literally, you are vaccinating by breathing. That's the process, is that that biofilm goes into your stomach, it has trapped that little organism, your body recognizes the organism, then it tells the rest of your body not to accept it as the nutrients are taken into your body. So that's a complex system. How do we exist without that? That's just a part of it. That's just your snot.
We don't live very long if our systems don't work properly or our immune system's broken.
Yeah, immunity. Yeah, immunity is extremely important to our existence. In fact, I have heard, and I don't know if this is true yet, but I have heard that as your body gets used to viruses, your system starts to alert itself to understand how to protect against cancers. So your virus protection is related to eventually your ability to prevent cancers. So that's pretty fascinating. I don't know if that's true yet, but that's what I've heard. And if that's true, then your system is extremely complex and very important, including your mucus. That's just one small thing. Yeah.
And we mess up our own feeling by doing something as when we see something's wrong, we want to take a pill to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the natural parts of our immune system is to cause a fever.
Yeah.
The fever's not the sickness, the fever's the cure.
Right, that's right.
let the fever happen. If you take
Mhm.
aspirin, which will reduce the fever,
Yeah.
but it's that high fever that kills the bug.
Right.
Body.
I've actually been trying to understand what sickness would be without your body's defensive processes. Because,
Fewer of us.
yeah, but I mean, here's what I mean by that. Everything that you think of as unpleasant in terms of your experience of sickness, every part of it is your body doing the rejection of the thing that's in it, right? So you get a high temperature. Why do you get a high temperature? Because God has designed you to heat up so that you start sweating the toxins back out. And then you start coughing. Why? Because God has designed you to try to get that stuff back out of you. And you might throw up. Why? Because God has said anything that's in this little space in here needs to come back out because something's wrong, right? So all of those experiences are your body getting rid of the problem. That even your inflammation, right? If you sprain your leg, right, you get inflammation in your ankle, and that's meant to be like an internal cast so that your leg doesn't move, right? That inflammation is important. Part of the healing. Yeah, Jackie.
So, like, I never got the flu growing up, but I never got the flu shot because, like, my
Mhm.
dad never got it, and it was just our family thing, so we just didn't get, like, the flu shot, you know?
Mhm.
And I never got sick. And then I was, like, in my 20s, almost 30s, and I got the flu really bad before COVID.
Mhm.
And I got the flu shot, and I think it just made me sicker. Like, my body, like, reacted to it, like, or didn't react to it, you know? Like, it didn't do what it was supposed to do
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
And it was just crazy. Like,
That
I
doesn't
never
seem a
got
very
it.
uncommon
Shots always give
situation.
sickness.
Mhm.
Like with the vaccine, say, shingles.
Mhm.
The efficacy is not 100%. No vaccine's 100%.
Yeah. Right.
So flu and pneumonia, I'll take flu, because flu changes, the variation changes. And
Mhm.
they're guessing what the variation is when they give you the vaccine.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get it right, and even if they get it right, not every system accepts it, so the efficacy can be low.
Right.
Sometimes the average flu vaccine, I think, is between 30 and 40%, where that
Mm.
means 30 or 40% of the people they won't get that version of it if they get it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not 100%, but
Now there is still, what's interesting is that there's still micro evolution still happening, not macro, like not crossing species, but there's still that micro organism is, the microorganism is still adjusting even when that vaccine is being developed, so that when that vaccine is developed, the microorganism is already steps ahead. So I think that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of escape right now. But so the whole point of this, though, is that I'm just saying that God has given us systems that are extremely complex, and those complex systems demand an answer. Or why do we have such detailed systems? Sometime go take a look at how coding happens. Like they've kind of created these little CG videos of what it looks like to create like your DNA as something is kind of splicing little pieces together, and it's amazing to look at. It's just like that exists in our systems. Your cell has basically all the functions of a major city. Every cell. It has discard system. It has nutrient systems. It has travel systems within it. Things can move around in it, so it has little ways of moving. I mean, it's like a little city, every one of your cells. How do we avoid this idea that there's a designer? And it's crazy, yeah. It's not stupid, but it is crazy.
When I was studying at UCLA, I studied microbiology as well as one
Oh,
of
no way.
the courses.
I'd love to talk
And-
to you more.
And one of the things that our professor threw up on the computer was a sequence of a chicken virus. And there was a guy by the name of Doucheberg
Mhm.
that's his name, I'm sorry.
Okay, everybody giggle,
He was
okay.
a professor at UC Berkeley
Mhm.
and did a lot of, he was a virologist, and discovered that this particular chicken virus led to a cancer that the chicken had. And our professor put up the sequence of the virus, the genetics of the virus, and then put up the sequence of the genetics of the cancer. They were identical for long strips. of
Whoa.
that. And so our immune system is very much involved in the
Whoa.
protection of us, of cancers.
Does
What-
that relate to what I was saying before, that basically the identification of the viruses will help us prevent cancers?
Could,
So being sick when you're young is actually a really good thing in
could
some
be,
way.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my colleagues used to be at Children's Hospital of LA, and one of my colleagues, incidentally, he was working on his second PhD, and that was theology. And he loved Jesus Christ with all his heart. But one of the things that he was working on was to take a virus and engineer that virus to a target organ in the body, and then add that to that virus some pieces of a chemical that when they got into that particular organ, we're talking about like pancreatic cancer, and this virus would snake its way into the pancreas, and with it would carry the precursor chemicals to kill that cancer, or it's a new form of chemotherapy that doesn't kill the body. It is targeted toward a cell. And that's one of the things that and that was like 10, 11 years ago. But that's one of the things that they're working on. And
Wow.
I have to say that we are not God.
Yeah.
And so for us to figure that out, it might take decades.
Yes, right.
Absolutely. But God did arrange our immune system to protect us. And in fact, some of the drugs that people are taking today there is the caveat, may lead to certain kinds of cancers. Okay, because those drugs knock out certain portions of the immune system that keep us safe. And there are tons of things, lots of things that happen in our immune system that God has, that man has no clue that God put there for our
Yes.
protection.
What's amazing is that we actually have systems that already work on the level of complexity that they're supposed to be working on. So one person has begun to say that vaccinating beyond the skin is a highly invasive process. It shouldn't be done because you're avoiding the process that God has given you that identifies the problems already. It does it outside the body, you know. So to skip that and to put something into your skin and into your bloodstream is actually not wise. It seems to work for some people, but not for everybody. But it's not wise to skip past that whole system and just go right for the bloodstream. It's invasive, and it skips the I guess you could say the glorious design that we've been given. You know, it skips all that and it just says it's not important. No, that system that we have through our respiratory and our digestive system to identify and process invaders is a really good system. It should be used as much as we can. Yeah. Yes, thank you. That would be great.
It's interesting. I had a liver transplant. So the new liver is a good thing, but my body doesn't recognize it as a good thing. So it tries to reject it. You know, so I have to take certain medicines to reduce that rejection. You probably know more about it than me. I just take certain medicines. But
Wow.
so even though it's considering my liver as a virus.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Now does that?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know for life. Does
Yeah.
it? Now it doesn't matter if you have the same blood type. Interesting.
You wanna get the match as close as possible, but
Yeah.
as David said,
Wow.
the body's gonna still consider it.
I mean, it's been 15 years,
Yeah.
you know, or 16 years, but it still is something that I have to deal with, you know, and get
Yeah.
tested on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, fascinating because I mean, the idea is that God gave you your own stuff to work with, and if you take it from somebody else, then there is going to be a inability to quite mesh together well enough. You know,
So
now
even
it's better
though-
than dying, so I'm
Yeah.
glad you were able to
So even
transplant.
though the
but-
new liver
Yeah.
is a good thing,
Mhm.
my body in some ways doesn't think it is.
Yeah, right, yeah. Because you have a magnificent immune system, you know.
Yeah.
It's meant to prevent foreign bodies, you know. Amazing. I mean, all these things are just to say that we have been given an incredible world and incredible systems, and it makes it hard for us to look at it and just not recognize that there is a God. And the more we could talk all night, we could talk for several weeks on this. There's photosynthesis in leaves. I mean, things like that. Sonar in bats. I was just reading something about. I think it's a baby squid when they're first forming, before they figure out their whole system of transportation. They still have to get around before they develop legs that will give them transportation. So they adjust the amount of ammonia in their systems, and they somehow produce and emit or remove the ammonia in their system, and it gives them the ability to float or drop, just like you would with in a hot air balloon when you drop weights off, right? Same kind of idea. Ammonia, you know, yeah. And so we have an incredibly complex world. And I think we should be able to look at it and say, there certainly must be a God, you know. I can paint a... I don't know. I think they produce the ammonia somehow.
Yeah, but that's my point, is like, it has to be a creator that, right.
Yeah,
It's not like cows and methane, God created that.
yeah, yeah. And there's a purpose, right?
Pastor
Um,
Dan, can you explain just a little bit on verse 21? Which
Yeah.
says, though they knew God. What does that word "knew" mean? Is it like just a knowledge that there is a God,
Yeah,
but not a
I
belief
thi-
in Him, or
yeah. I think that it's very important to understand that. I mean, the objective of the human design is that we would know God. You know, I mean, when people are rejected from heaven, Jesus says, "I never knew you." Right. So this is different from that. It's not saying that we all start in a place where we know God in terms of a relationship. What it's saying is they know enough to know that there is a God, and yet they're rejecting Him. So there's no relationship there, you know. And I think that's a very important question, actually. There's no relationship there. There's only rejection, despite what they could see in creation. So although they knew God, you could also say they knew of God. They did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him. It became futile in their thinking. Tom, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, if you go back to verse 16, I don't know what other versions say, but if you look in verse 16, it starts out 4, verse 17, 4, verse 18, 4, verse 20, 4, verse 21, 4, verse 25, 4, verse 26, 4. We need to realize that Paul's not posing questions here. He's making statements. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, and he says, for it. So what is the it? It is the gospel, which you could extend that to say the word of God. Verse 17, for in it, the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, the wrath of God is revealed in verse 18. All this has been presented through the word of God. So I look at it when he says, like in verse 21, to your question, for even though they knew God, they know what's been revealed, they know what's been written, but they're ignoring it. Where's that verse that even says in verse 17 it even says, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written. So people have a written record of what God has done. And we're at least until we become Christians, we're willingly refusing to believe what God has said. It's a choice that we make. And if it wasn't for the power of the Holy Spirit drawing us to God, we would never see that.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. That's another part of this is we need to not miss that not only is there a written record like Tom was talking about, but there's also, I mean, it's written into nature and it's written into our hearts that there is a God. I'm not saying that we have like a divine spark, you know, I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is there's something that God holds us culpable to. that there is a knowledge that there is a creator, and that at least there's some expectation over us in life. And without that, without that, we'd be sort of scot-free. Yeah.
I'm not going to dive for the mic.
Yeah, that's all right.
In terms of what Tom was saying, right, Tom? Yeah. I hope. Adam and Eve knew God,
Mhm.
and so there is the spoken word
Mhm.
that has been handed down of the knowledge of God.
Yeah, yeah.
In the beginning was the word.
Right, yeah.
But, just from that sense, it's like, yeah, they knew because God was spoken of all through the generations.
I'm sorry, you're saying Adam and Eve knew?
Adam and Eve knew God.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. So they spoke of God, and so yeah, even before it was written, they still had what do they call that? Yeah, storytelling. There's a word for it. Verbal tradition. I can't think of the term for it, but yeah, they would have spoken. And this is actually one reason we believe that Moses was able to write down, the creation story, because he would have had. I'm sorry. Yes, I did say Moses. Did I say Noah? Because there would have been an oral tradition handed down, and so he would have collected these true stories about God that were handed verbally to each other, and then he would have written them down. So yeah, there's.
Hebrews 10:16.
Go ahead. Hebrews 10:16.
Yes. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws into their heart, and in their minds I will write them. And I think that kind of goes right back to what you were saying. Even an atheist, in the worst of times, doesn't reach out for Satan.
Yeah, right.
Nobody.
Yeah.
They reach out for God.
Yeah.
Because deep down inside, they
Yeah.
know.
They know something. Yeah.
But many are misled because look at all the different religions. Hindus have their God,
Mhm.
Muslims have their God, so they think that they're in connection with.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is one of Satan's big plans, I think, is to just come in there and draw off of the fact that he knows that all humans have some understanding that there's a God. And so he fills the gap with other options. And that's a very clever plan. Instead of making everybody atheist, he just says, well, why don't you just take an alternative, Roseanne.
Ecclesiastes 3:11 says God has put eternity in the heart of man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's put eternity in our heart.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's there because God put it there. Our longing, our searching for him is because he put that in our hearts.
Yeah.
To search for him.
Yeah. But bizarrely, we suppress that and don't. We have that sin nature that says, I don't want it, Yeah.
And I have a very dear friend that I shared scripture with back in junior high school over in Florida, and we still communicate. But she worships at the temple of the universe.
Mm.
And it just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I just said, it is a little girl to her that she can worship the one who made the universe that she cares about.
Well, let's go back to verse 25. It says that they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator. So those who worship the universe are really in that position right there. They're worshiping the creature rather than the creator, the created thing as opposed to the creator. And so really this is, it sort of feels glorious to be able to worship the wonder of nature and to, you get your CG images of planets and things like that. And, oh, yeah, look at that. It's wonderful and beautiful. And it's easy to just kind of go, well, because it's grand and beautiful, I'll just worship that. That's not where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to understand through the things that we see that are grand and beautiful, we should be able to look at that and say, there is a God who is even grander and even more beautiful.
And it's even more evident if you look at the stars.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yes, what is it? Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament shows his handiwork. Night unto night they utter speech. Day unto day they bring forth knowledge. I think that's how it goes. basically the idea is even the stars proclaim the existence of God. And by the way, I still believe very strongly that people were aware of the gospel message in the stars. I believe that they were aware of what we now call the Mazzaroth, which is a very systematic gospel message, that there would be a hero one day, that there's conflict between the hero and the serpent, and that ultimately the lion crushes the serpent. That's the last constellations, are the lion crushing the serpent. And that's, when Paul talks about it, I'm not going to be able to remember where this is. I think it's Romans chapter 10. Let me see if I can find it real quick. It's the one where he quotes, how shall they hear, right?
Oh, yeah, it's 18.
Is it 10:18?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so let me read this. I'm going to start a little bit earlier. It says, verse 16, for they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? So faith comes from hearing, and hearing comes through the word of Christ. But I ask, have they not heard? Okay, presumably, what's he talking about? Have they not heard what? The gospel, right? That's the subject of the sentence, of the paragraph. Have they not heard the gospel? He goes, indeed they have, and then he quotes Psalm 19. Their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. Well, he just quoted a psalm about the stars, saying that they have spoken the gospel. Okay? Let me read that again. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. But I ask, have they not heard, presumably, the gospel? Right? That's what he's talking about. Have they not heard the gospel? Indeed they have, for the stars have been proclaiming. I think that's the Mazzaroth. I think that's what we're getting at there. So in other words, God set those stars up there, and they proclaimed the gospel. They were for signs and for seasons, and they proclaimed something. And if we ignore what has been proclaimed, then we're not getting the gospel. And there were people who could have gotten the gospel by knowing those signs. You know, it's not just a majestic image. People understood that as proclaiming the gospel at one point, and I think we've kind of lost that over time. So let me keep reading here. I'm going to go back to verse 28, Romans chapter 1, verse 28. And since they did not see it fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind, to do what ought not to be done. And they were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree, though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but also give approval to those who practice them. So, I know we read this last week, so I'm just recovering the space here. This is actually the ESV. We have a couple over here. So, but the idea here is that I don't want to miss this, that God gives man over to his sin. This is like the final judgment. He gives us over. We saw this with Pharaoh. Pharaoh denied the departure of the Israelites. And God finally, I think it's number 7, 8, 9, something like that, maybe 6, 7, 8, and 9. Those last plagues are all God giving him over to his rebellion. We see the same thing we see the same thing here. We see the same thing in Revelation, that the plagues in Revelation are God's basically giving man over to his own wickedness that he's brought in. And I think this is how God operates. And we need to understand that the wickedness that we experience here, some of it is wickedness that God judges, but we have to understand that some of it is the judgment itself. We are given over to a debased mind. And so if we're in a state of having that debased mind, we need to understand we're already on that path. But I do want to say this, I said this at the end of last week, and I just think this is very important. What this chapter is doing is it's leveling all of us out. It's saying all of us are in this condition. We are all in a position of having been given over. That's our starting point. So he's not talking about the really bad people here. He's talking about all the people here. And so this is the state in which we have found ourselves, from which God will save us. God only saves sinners. And so he has consigned us all to sin, to say, I'm here to save you. So this starting point, it sounds so negative, but it's interesting that what he's going to establish throughout the rest of this book is that he's establishing this is the starting point for God pursuing us and loving us. This is the starting point. And so we shouldn't be reading these verses and going, oh, well, let's find this person I don't like in this list. Here's a gossip here. Oh, yeah, I know some gossips. Boy, they don't deserve God's grace. No, this is the starting point. He's saying everyone who is an inventor of evil and boastful and insolent and haughty and gossips and haters of God and all these people, these are the people that God has chosen to love. This is our starting point. And I think this is rather beautiful that God starts with this group of people, because this is all of us. This is where you see that evidence of God saying, basically, that love is God's nature. It isn't about us being lovable. It is just the fact that it's his nature. And our state of existence and our sinfulness and our hatred of him, our avoidance of him, isn't going to affect whether or not he loves us. He has chosen to love the sinner. And so that it's evidence that love is simply part of his nature. Actually, in some verses, God is love. It's 1 John. God is love. He doesn't just have love. He is love.
It kind of makes the argument that some give that, God sends people to hell. No, he does not. If this is their choice not to acknowledge him, not to receive from him,
Yeah.
Then he will give them over
Yeah.
to what they're choosing. And the individual is choosing on their own by not
Yeah.
recognizing God.
Yeah. So one way to put that is that these things are on that path to hell. They're on a path to destruction. And when we choose these things, we are choosing our path to destruction. And that God is offering us an opportunity off that path, is incredible grace. But hell is the ultimate destination of the path of death. And we are being invited off of it and into the path of life. And it's on us when we choose against that. It's just on us. Because we've had the warning and we had that understanding that there is a God in us. Yeah.
Do you think that that's why there's like an age of accountability?
Mm.
Because, you can see in a 2-year-old, no, they're disobedient to their parents,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they're on that path already.
Right.
But there's some sort of grace that I don't quite comprehend, except
Yeah.
that it's amazing. That there's like an age of accountability.
Yeah. I believe very strongly in an age of accountability. It's in a verse with David where his son is going to be judged. He's receiving the punishment for his sin, but it comes in the form of his firstborn being lost. And this is with Bathsheba. And then there's, I think it's in the chapter, I don't think it's in the Psalms, but he says that one day he will see his son, So as
It says, I can't go to him, but he can't come to me, but I can go to him.
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Pastor Dan has said that that's in the Psalms.
Have I said that? I don't remember. Is it in a psalm or is it just in the passage?
Psalm's the best book in the Bible.
It's in the story. Okay. Yeah, okay. So here, like, now we've had a couple of miscarriages now, and to know that someday we'll be seeing those kids is pretty cool. You know, it really helps. You know, it's a similar situation where we don't grieve as others grieve, because we know that there is a future experience of that person.
I'm gonna go check it with
Craig, can I get a guy? Yeah, thank you. Craig will fight him.
While they're doing that story you're talking about, he's talking about that. I just completely lost my train of thought.
Going to him and him coming.
Yeah, I knew that part of it. There was another part of it. I can't think of it now.
Were you going to comment on the fact that I had miscarriages that I'm expecting to see someday? Okay. Well, if it comes to you, let us know. We'll start there again. I just wanted to go back and take a look at some of the actual kind of scientific concepts that are out there that help us to see God. So we already covered this. We don't need to cover Romans chapter 1 at length again, but next week we'll get into Romans chapter 2. I will say that Romans chapter 2 is interesting because he begins to address specifically the his countrymen, the Jewish person. And so it's not really obvious. At one point, he just kind of goes, who are you, a man, to pass judgment on other people? But once you see how they're passing judgment, it becomes very clear that he's speaking to people who are judging others through the, I guess you could say, the lens of the first covenant, the law covenant. And so it's one of these situations where suddenly Paul is speaking to the Jewish person specifically. And then he's going to make the argument, basically, you are special. You've been chosen by God, and yet your sins are showing that you're not living in that lifestyle that you should be living in. And if you look across the aisle, and if you see other people who are not Jewish people and they're living righteously, doesn't that kind of count for something? You know, so he's drawing this contrast, and basically he's holding the person who has the law of God accountable to it. So in other words, in the first chapter, we saw the fact that all of us know that there is a God, period. We just know that there's a God. That holds us accountable. And then a person might look at that, a Jewish person might look at that and say, well, we have the law of God, so we're special. And he's going to be making the argument, no, it's actually kind of a worse situation for you, because not only did you know that there was a God generally, you actually had his law and were still disobeying it. And so it doesn't necessarily benefit you that you had a knowledge of good and evil. It's actually brought you death, you know. So to borrow from Genesis 1 story, Genesis 2. But anyway, so we'll,
I thought of the point.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so in that same story that's in Samuel about David, when he goes on to say, because his servants question him, and they say, because like when the child was sick, he's like fasting and letting himself go, sort of. And then once the child dies, and it says he washed himself, started eating, put on clothes, and he's almost like celebrating. His servants are going like, hey, wait, you should be mourning now.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
putting on fresh clothes, washing yourself, eating. What's the deal? It's because he had that expectation.
Yeah.
That he said, he said, I think he says something along the lines like, if I do this now, who knows, maybe God will relent of what he told me is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But he does, and he takes the child's life, and David says, okay, I'm going to praise God for that, even though it's my fault.
Right.
But he realizes that, hey, at some point in time, I'm going to see that child.
Yeah, that's,
Yes, you were totally right on your reference. It's
2 Samuel 12.
first one to read.
Okay. Yeah, 2 Samuel 12. Okay, so if you want to take a look at that, I think that's one of the best verses to just understand that there is such a thing as an age of accountability. And I believe that that's in keeping with how God operates. Where there is no law, there is no death. That's what he says in Romans chapter 4, I think it is. And so, where there's no law, there is no sin, I think it is. Basically, the idea is if there is no law to fail, then there is no failure of the law. And if a child is really kind of unaware of what's right and wrong, that he's not held to that accountability. But as that child gets to know what is right and wrong, they are held to accountability. So, yeah.
Has there ever been a determination about like what that age is?
I really don't. Yeah, I don't know. I think that it could be different for different kids who perceive things differently. Because I think a lot of our early life, and God has designed this too. This is a part of our design, right? When we're born, we need food. And so we're built with this alarm system to say, I need food. And we start screaming, and the decibels let our parents know that we need food, right? We wouldn't survive without this alarm system. And so, but we have to grow into a place where we begin to ask, but there's this like this time where when we want something and our body tells us we want something, we're going to say, I want that and I want it now. And I think that God has had grace to not have our eternity resting on that selfish, starting point. We don't go to hell because we were screaming and saying, I want this now. So there's a point where I think when we begin to know what's right and wrong, and we begin to transfer into a time where we realize, oh no, I'm in a world with other people who also need things. When we begin to understand that, I think that's when that accountability comes in. But I mean, who knows what the age would be?
There were these two little boys in the back seat of the car. And the parents were driving on a long trip, and they started fighting, and they got into it. And the mom turned around and said, the devil's got into you. You're kicking, you're hitting, and you're spitting. And one of the little boys says, no, Mom, spitting was my own idea. And hence comes the accountability, and that the little boy knew what he was doing was wrong.
Yeah, right. Interesting. That's funny. That one threw me for a loop. Well, we'll get back into Romans chapter 2 next week. So I would recommend that you guys read it. Try to wrap your mind around what exactly is going. Romans chapter 2, yeah. Try to wrap your mind around what exactly is going on. I would highly encourage you to look at it in terms of how does this fit the greater argument? What is being argued for in this passage? These are not like the Proverbs. They're not just isolated verses that say something individually. There's a line of thought that's being developed, and so I would again highly encourage you, look at the verses, ask yourself, why is this here? Not just what is it saying, but why is this here? And I think that to me, that question, just so you know, for my style of study, that has always been the most important question. I believe that why is this verse here is just as important, maybe more important than what exactly is this saying. Because I don't think you can quite ever understand what the verse is saying without understanding it in its context and its flow of the argument being made. So ask yourself as you read this, why are these verses here? Why is this paragraph here? Why are these chapters here? And eventually you'll get to know that there is an argument being developed, and what he's arguing for is the definition and purpose and goodness of the gospel. So that's very important. Let's go ahead and close and pray. Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you for the many amazing things that we all got to hear today, Lord. Just the stuff beyond what I was able to prepare, Lord. The other scientific ideas and just the other supports for the fact that you are an amazing creator, and you've created us, you've put us in an amazing world. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to take it the next step, Lord, not to just to sort of be surprised and amazed at the amazing world that we're in. I pray, Lord, that you will help us to see that it's important that we have been placed here by you, and we have been placed with purpose, and our purpose ultimately is to get to know you and to love you forever. And so, Lord, I pray that you will drive us toward that purpose and help us, Lord, to be pursuers of God, Lord, even though none have pursued after you, Lord. I pray that you would change us to be people that would pursue after you. We pray these